Welcome, friends. We're glad to have you here this evening. I'm Carl Colon, the Executive Director of the Greene County Public Library. On behalf of all of us, I want to welcome and thank you for joining us. The library is thrilled to be part of the national premiere of Black Men in White Coats, a new documentary that explores America's desperate need for more Black male doctors, the barriers to meeting that need, and the path forward. We're even more thrilled to host this panel discussion and question and answer session with a group of remarkable professions from around Greene County. Our panelists represent some of our finest institutions: Xenia Community Schools, Yellow Springs Community Schools, Central State University, Kettering Health Network Soin Medical Center, and Wright State's Boonshoft School of Medicine. I want to thank each of them for collaborating with us to bring you this event. And now, without further ado, I want to introduce you to your moderator for this question and answer panel session, Mr. John Gudgel. For over 40 years, Mr. Gudgel has been an educator and mentor to thousands of students in Yellow Springs. This includes 15 years as principal at Yellow Springs High School, head coach of a 6-time state championship track team, and the founder of the 365 Project, an organization that has been promoting our community's diverse African American heritage, Black culture, and racial equity since 2006. Take it away, John.
Thank you, Carl, and thank you, Greene County Public Library, for making Black men in white coats available to watch here in Greene County. I also want to give a thank you to someone who's working behind the scenes, Evan Scott, who's taking care of our technical issues today. More importantly, the work you did to recognize this panel discussion is a great way for all of us to better understand this topic and work to improve how we improve our healthcare in Greene County and beyond. It's my pleasure to be your moderator this evening. And as Carl said, I want to welcome all of our attendees with us. I'd like to take a minute to set the stage for our discussion this evening. First and foremost, as powerful as Black Men in White Coats is, we're excited to have our panel discuss it, led in part by your questions. We want to be able to give local context to the film, local experience, and as well discuss what we as a community want to do moving forward. Also, we need to give a big thank you to Dr. Dale. So we encourage you to ask the questions you have from watching the film. You can ask your questions in the Q&A section of your screen at any time, and we will get to them in order as efficiently as we can. But let's start off with an introduction of our panelists. First off, I'd like to start off with Dr. Gabe Lofton. He is the superintendent of the Xenia Community Schools and has held that position since 2017. His career began in 2000 as a middle and high school teacher, and he has held increasing leadership positions. Prior to his appointment at Xenia Schools, Dr. Lofton was the assistant superintendent for Cincinnati Public Schools. He earned his master's and doctoral degrees from Miami University in Oxford, Ohio. Welcome, Dr. Lofton. Next, I'd like to introduce Dr. Karen Mathews, who is the medical director for Central State University. She received her MD degree in 1985 from Washington University School of Medicine in St. Louis, Missouri. Dr. Mathews spent 26 years of her medical career as an Air Force officer holding clinical, academic, administrative, and command positions during that time. She retired in 2011 with the rank of colonel. Since then, she has been in her current position with Central State University. Thank you, Dr. Mathews. Dr. Christopher Holloway is a highly skilled family medicine physician with the Kettering Physician Network. He earned his medical degree from Loma Linda University School of Medicine, followed by his residency program at Soin Medical Center. While Dr. Holloway specializes in patients of all ages across a broad practice, he has particular experience in chronic disease management, preventive care, and pediatric care, including newborns. Welcome, Dr. Holloway. And finally, Mr. Joshua Madden, who is a senior at Wright State University's Boonshoft School of Medicine. Mr. Madden is headed into his medical residency later this year and is scheduled to officially become Dr. Madden this spring. Joshua is a native of Kansas City, and as he said earlier, sorry about that situation from a couple Sundays ago, and he did his undergraduate degree at Tuskegee University. I know we can't give a round of applause, but perhaps we can just give them a shout out and a thank you and appreciation for serving as panelists this evening. Okay, so we're going to start off with reactions and thoughts from our panelists in terms of what were takeaways that you had from the documentary. So in no particular order, but maybe we'll just start off in the way we introduced you with your bio. So Dr. Lofton, just some thoughts you had from the film and the takeaway.
Yeah, so thank you and good evening. I would first like to thank the Greene County Public Library for hosting this event tonight and really bringing what seems to be a national conundrum to the forefront here regionally. So again, thank you, Greene County Public Library, for this conversation. So as I watched the film, I was struck by one key data point, and that was only about 2% of our nation's doctors are Black men. I thought that data point was palpable, and still sticks with me today in trying to figure out what can we do from an education standpoint to combat that from a K-12 perspective. So there are tons of other key points and things that I would like to talk about, but for me in the film, that was probably the most palpable.
Thank you. Dr. Mathews.
Thank you, everyone. It is truly an honor for me to be able to participate on this panel. When I watched the movie, it was clear to me that this movie is vitally important because it brings to the forefront the surprising status quo, and it explores the reasons behind that. And as I watched the movie, it made me think of my childhood. It made me think of my supportive family, my supportive teachers in grade school. And it made me realize that it is important that people see possibilities and that they get adequate exposure, adequate encouragement. It also reminded me of a particular episode when I was about 13 years old in high school. And a counselor sat down in front of me and said, "What do you think you want to be when you grow up?" And I was always inquisitive. I always liked the sciences. I always liked math. And I said, "I think I want to be a doctor." And the response I got was, "Well, what makes you think you can be a doctor?" And again, a comment like this and watching the movie really emphasizes that we have to make young people, both young men and young women, aware of their possibilities, aware that if they work hard and if they truly have an interest, there really should not be something that keeps them from achieving their goals.
Thank you. Dr. Holloway.
Thank you very much. My initial thoughts after watching the documentary were that the topics raised were stark, they were well stated, and they were surprising. Like I was mentioning to the panel before we started this, I'd always been the minority when it came to my med school education, residency, even now where I'm working. But I didn't realize how awful the numbers were. So this documentary opened my eyes, and it definitely, as I'm sure it did for all of us, it inspired a sense of urgency. As far as the things that I took away from the documentary, there were 3 key points that stuck with me. The first was the importance of addressing the lack of high expectations of African-American children, especially males, when it comes to non-athletic pursuits from both within our own community and outside of it. I'm about 6'4", and people ask me about basketball all day, and that's fine. But it's something that whenever I'm approached by that, or whenever I think about that, I think it would be it's a missed opportunity for us. The next thing is the importance of the visibility and accessibility of role models. I was blessed to have a multitude of role models in my life, and I see it as vitally important. And at this stage in my career, just finishing my training, it's an awesome opportunity to now be able to turn and then reach back. And lastly, I appreciated the discussion in regards to medical school admissions and education, and how we can approach multiple ways to approach this issue from that standpoint. So.
Thank you, Dr. Holloway. And finally, Mr. Joshua, soon to be Dr. Madden.
Yes. The film, I felt like embodied everything that I had thought about, and things that I was concerned about prior to even coming into medicine, honestly. In the environment I grew up with, it was just like everyone everywhere else, Kansas City wise, where basketball or entertainment was the thing that was pressed towards me and towards some of my friends when we were growing up. That was the way that we were going to make it out of this environment, or that's the way that we were going to make a living. And I thought that the video talked about that, and it talked about it a lot in terms of like, we need to stop that. We need to stop that narrative, like that this is the only option. Because sometimes if you're not the best athlete at your school, if you're not the best entertainer or singer, then all of a sudden now you're not worth anything. You're not valid in a sense. And so when it's talked about the imagery, when it talked about those things, I always remember seeing basketball players or people who played overseas playing basketball, or who had all the nice clothes, had the things that I wanted growing up. And seeing them do that, that pushed me to say I wanted to play basketball, and I did that. But now, I guess like when I wasn't successful, because unlike Dr. Christopher, I'm not 6'4", I'm 5'9", and so I wasn't able to, move forward in that in basketball. But it was just the mentality that I took from that allowed me to do well in medicine. And I think that being able to finally get to college, where I saw other people who were going off into medicine, really pushed me and made me say, like, this is something I could do. And so, yeah, I thought the video was amazing. The documentary was amazing.
Thank you. So we have questions in our Q&A, and I know some of you as panelists have already submitted some questions, but I want to take off on that aspect of athletes. I don't know if you have seen the recent commercial. It's an AT&T commercial called Dreamin' Black. And LeBron James is narrating that commercial. But during that commercial, there are several cutouts of Black people in various professions. And one of the individuals that is flashed on the screen is Dr. Dale. And when I saw that commercial, I thought, wow, we're doing an upcoming discussion about Dr. Dale. But the lead in is LeBron James. So Dr. Holloway and Mr. Madden and Dr. Lofton, and not trying to put Dr. Mathews to the side, but all three of you, including myself, there's this pressure of athletes, and we could go further into rap and music and whatnot. And during the film, Nate Hughes, NFL football player turned doctor, talked about that. So I guess, and Dr. Lofton, I'm going to start with you because you coached. How do we get away, and not to say that we can't have a balance of athletics and academics, but what can we do? Because Joshua, you talked about that, and Chris, you talked about, what can we do to help our young people, male and female, understand the importance of academics?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good question, John. I think it's not an either or proposition. I think it's a both and. I think our young people have to realize that they can aspire to be athletes, but they also have to be scholars. And when you put it within that context to them, I think they respond differently than if you would say, only less than 1% of you all will become professional athletes. So I think it's about how we phrase it and how we communicate to our young people. And secondly, I would say within the movie, Dr. Dale talked about, and I want to quote him correctly, he talked about, if you can't be what you can't see. And I think from a public school aspect and a K-12 perspective, I think it's our responsibility to make sure that we're putting diverse representations of different vocations in front of our children. So what does that mean? That means that when you have a career day, bringing individuals in like soon to be Dr. Madden, Dr. Holloway, and Dr. Mathews. So young people can begin to see, wow, I can actually be something other than a professional basketball player or a football player or something in the artistic field. So, I think it's about, number one, how we communicate with our students about their aspirations. And then secondly, and lastly, I think it's about making sure that we put diverse representations of people in front of them at a very early age, not just when they get to high school, but it really has to start early, and as early as kindergarten, to be quite frank.
Anybody else want to add to that?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so I agree. I think that those kind of coincide. In my public school, when I was growing up, in order to play sports, you had to have a certain GPA. You had to have over 3.25 or so in order to actually play. And that was instilled by our coaches. That was not something that the school had said that you mandated that we had to do. But I felt like sport, people have a drive. If they want to play sports, if that's what they want to do, if they have a goal, if they have a standard to, in order to play, then they'll do that. And I feel like that helped a lot of students out that maybe didn't have the parents at home all the time because they're working, to push them to do their homework. Maybe they said, that gave them that self-motivation to say, hey, okay, when I get home, I'll make sure I knock out these homework assignments because I want to play in the football game Friday. So I think that those kind of work both hand in hand. And honestly, it worked best for me because, coming from playing competitive basketball, playing on the AAU circuit, which is just competitive summer basketball, switching over to academics, I took that same mentality that I learned from basketball in terms of putting in the time, putting in the effort, putting in the hours to perfect my jump shot, perfect my handles. I use that now in medicine every day when I study, when I read. So 20, 30 pages to me is nothing because I put in 3, 4, 5 hours before when I worked out for basketball. So I think it goes hand in hand, exactly like Dr. Lofton said.
Thank you.
And if I could add, I love this because this is the type of conversation that I have with people all the time. So I wrote down a few notes just to add so I don't restate what's already been said. First off, I want to say that sports is wonderful. Sports are wonderful. They've done so much for so many people. And as healthcare providers, we promote exercise. Many people coming from especially disadvantaged backgrounds, college is expensive. Sports provides them a way to pay for school. It provides them avenues to develop discipline, to learn how to work through difficulty, to learn team skills, to learn how to communicate. There's so many great things that we can learn from athletics. So athletics are not the problem. The problem is limitations. Growing up, I was always someone who loved academics from a young age. I was what you'd consider the quote unquote nerd at my school, right? Or one of them. And the comment that was said to me often was, well, you're not Black enough, or you're this or you're that, because I didn't have an aspiration to do rap, or I didn't have an aspiration. I mean, I like to play basketball. I like to play sports for fun, but it wasn't I didn't wake up in the morning for that. I liked school. I liked music. I liked other things. So I think one thing that we need as a community to realize is that we often limit ourselves to saying the Black experience is only one. There's only one Black experience, but no, we have just as much variety as any other culture or place. We have variety in the ways that we can express ourselves. We have variety in interests. And oftentimes we sell ourselves short to say that if I'm not good at one or two things, then I'm not who I say I am, then I'm not worth it. So I think that's the first thing. We need to not limit ourselves. We should be praising diversity amongst ourselves, but oftentimes we pull ourselves down to just minimize, this is the one way that we are. And the second thing is low expectations, low expectations. Just growing up I just remember in first grade, second grade, third grade, as I matriculated through middle school, I could see the aspirations of my classmates just kind of die away. And the only thing that they could see was, oh man, I can't wait to get the recess to play this or to do that or to, do these things that are just for today. I think that the reason, again, the issue is not sports. The issue is when it comes to sports, we want people to excel. We want us to go to the highest heights. But when it comes to everything else, the aspirations just aren't there because we don't hold each other to a high standard. So what I would say is we just need to, if we can take the same intensity that we give to our athletic programs to the other things and make it balanced, then we're there. That's it. We just need to raise the bar as far as expectations. And I think it starts with our parents, with our community, with each other, holding each other to a higher standard.
Andy. Dr. Mathews, you submitted a question that I'm going to read aloud, and we've got also some questions in the chat room. But Dr. Mathews, you shared a question. I'm going to read it over twice. What role do Black female peers at the college and medical school level have in helping Black men graduate from medical school? I'm going to read that again. What role do Black female peers at the college and medical school level have in helping Black men graduate from medical school? Dr. Mathews, you want to comment on that?
Absolutely. I put that question in there purposely, intentionally, to number one, showcase that Black women have also experienced some of the same sentiments and the same experiences that Black men have in achieving success in medical school, getting admitted to medical school, maybe not to the extent as Black men. But I also put that in there because sometimes there is a dichotomy or a showcase of the differences in success between Black men and Black female, when if you look at the glass half full, you can look at the opportunities that each has to uplift the other. Healthcare is a team endeavor. You've got many people with many disciplines, but they're all working for the same good. They're all working to save the patient. They're all working to improve the lives of patients, to improve outcomes. But in order for that to happen, they have to support each other. When I was in medical school, I learned for the first time the real benefits of group studying. I had always studied alone, studied very hard, and had done well. But when I got to medical school, somebody suggested we have study groups. And what I took from that is that everybody has certain skill sets. Everybody has certain strengths and weaknesses. And when you come together as a team, you can uplift each other. And you hear so much about Black mothers and Black grandmothers and nanas and aunts being supportive. And that can extend to non-relatives of the female sex who truly want to see all of their colleagues and peers perform well. So that's why I threw that question in there.
Would anyone else like to comment on that?
I would. I think that's it's amazing, Dr. Mathews, because honestly speaking, I met a lot of my mentors when I got to medical school, and all my mentors are women, Black women physicians, from a family friend who is a current residency assistant program director who set standards for me while it came to like scoring on certain tests for our step exams and board exams. She always told me like, oh, you had to go this higher score in order to match into emergency medicine. And I sat there and I would look at the statistics. And I'm like, well, the scores doesn't say that you have to have this type of 245, 260s in order to get this. I'm wondering why she's always saying this to me. Like, do I really need this? And her setting those standards for me always made me say like, okay, I'm going after it. I'm gonna make sure I get this score. And I would always text her, give her an update like, hey, I got a 240, I got a 260, you know, things like that. And I would tell her my scores every single time. And, but then, you know, I think about my mom when it comes to a lot of the things that, or my mom right now, you know, she always before every test would text me and say, you know, and do a prayer or call me and have a prayer with me right before I would go take a test. And that was so impactful for me. And I mean, even the women in my class from Janae Shelby, who's right now getting her MD PhD. I mean, she's amazing. She's killing it. My girlfriend in med school who's going into pathology. I mean, she was on me from the time we started of, you know, always staying on me, like study your biochem, study, get off YouTube, things like that, you know. Their focus, I think that Black women's focus is a little bit different than Black men. And I don't know why that is the case. And this is just my opinion. But I think that being around Black women and seeing how focused they were pushed me to be more focused.
So there's this aspect of gatekeepers, and Josh, you kind of alluded to that. And I think one of our audience members asked a question along those lines. And I'm going to pull it up real quick. By the way, Josh, you're getting a shout out from Janae on the Q&A, so I just thought I'd let you know. So one of these questions, this comes from Dr. Maha Nagarajan from Wilberforce. He's a biology professor at Wilberforce for the past 27 years. And he asked, when I watched this film, I strongly feel that medical schools select their students based on scores, even though most admission officials say they want to increase diversity and to look at the whole student. They need to be more honest because too many students who have potential are disillusioned by rejections or whatnot. So the film talked about this whole aspect of gatekeepers relying solely on test scores and not looking at the whole person. So I wonder if someone would like to comment on that. I know, Josh, you just kind of gone through some of that. But just in general, what about that aspect of the film where the gatekeeper mentality came up? Anybody want to comment on that?
Okay, I can speak on it, sorry. So I was on the admissions committee for my medical school here. And honestly speaking, you know, it was a different experience because I had already interviewed, and then 2 years later, I was the person who was interviewing other applicants to get into medical school. And we would constantly have these discussions where people would assume like, oh, you needed to get you needed to get this 512, or you needed to get this super high score on MCAT, or you have to have this super high GPA in order to get in medical school, because that's what they were told it took to get into medical school. But I felt like a lot of people did not recognize that, you know, this is a one-time test that put random questions on there that really did not encompass like everything that you knew as a student or as a person taking this test. It was just one glimpse. And so you have these situations where if you come from privilege, I want to talk about that. If you come from privilege where you have family members that can pay for you to take these courses, these Kaplan courses, or buy you the textbooks that you need in order to do well on the MCAT, then yeah, I could see you getting a 510 or these high scores. But for instance, for me, you know, my father had just passed away right before I took my MCAT. We didn't have a lot of money. And so I was in college and I tried to save up the money that I could, and I didn't know what textbooks to buy. And I got just one that was an old one, and I tried to use it, and I studied my butt off with it. And I took the MCAT, and I didn't really know how to really prepare, but I just tried. First time I took the MCAT, I did not do well. I said, okay, let me take 2-3 more weeks. I'm gonna study harder. And so one of the kids I was at the summer program with, they said, hey, I got like 4 different sets of MCAT textbooks that you could try out if you want to, because I don't need them anymore. He let me try them. And I found the one that best fit for me, and I used it. And then 3 weeks later, I took the MCAT again, and I did well and got into medical school. And it's interesting that people talk about these scores that you need in order to do well, because they say like, oh, this translates into how well you do on your board scores. I'll be completely honest. I got the national average on the MCAT, but that score was to say that I would possibly or probably not do as well on my STEP exams. I'm graduating right now at the top of my class. I scored above national average on my STEP 1. I had a 530. I had a 230. And then when I took my STEP 2 CK, I got a 261, which is the top 90th percentile. So those scores that people say that you need in order to get into medical school and those things like that, those are bogus. Those are not real. And those standards cannot fit for everybody who comes from different environments and different situations if they don't have the same resources.
Mathews, Dr. I'm sorry, go ahead, I'm sorry. Yes.
I'd like to piggyback a little bit on what Joshua said. And we're separated by, I'm guessing, 2 or 3 decades, but I will share this. One of my worst interviews was my interview at the med school I eventually went to. And it started out like this. What makes you think you can get into this medical school? You've got a decent GPA. It's pretty good. Your MCATs, they're not that good. They're okay. If you really want to come here, we'll put you on the second tier. And if somebody decides not to come, then we'll let you in. But when I heard the response, what makes you think you can get into this med school? Your MCATs aren't all that. I did not panic. Maybe there was a level of arrogancy. I said something like, well, I'm a hard worker and I know what I can accomplish. And it was as simple as that. So long story short, I got admitted. I did very well. I did not graduate at the top of my class, but I did well. I thought I got an excellent medical school education, and I was very thankful. So the take-home point is standardized test scores do not dictate how well you will perform. And while that may be one and should be one component of entrance into a medical school, it should not be the overwhelming factor that a group of people look at. Because if that is the case, they are going to miss out on a boatload of people who have the potential to give back to the community, to give back to society. And potentially this person that you did not admit may be the next person who goes into an area of research that benefits the entire world. So I'm being a bit dramatic, but I think it's important that people understand that test scores in and of themselves are not predictors. And there are some medical schools out there who are now beginning to understand that and don't require the NCAT. Now, that doesn't mean that getting into the school isn't a competitive process, because they want people who are well-rounded, who are community servants, who will add a layer of progress and improvement to the industry of healthcare.
If I could add as well, I really appreciate the previous 2 comments. I think gatekeepers are important. Like Dr. Mathews said, it keeps the quality of the applicants, it keeps the quality of the training, it makes it so that we can remain as standardized as possible in what we're teaching and what we're training, so that we know that wherever you go in America, you're getting a standard of care. I think what's important for us to realize is the concept of having a gatekeeper isn't bad, like as what's been said, but the idea and how we structure it just needs to be adjusted. Many studies have shown the indicators for success, like has been said, are not solely based on these exams. And if we are truly, in my medical school education, all we talked about was social determinants of health and health disparities and how we could fix them. It's something that came up, maybe not in every class, but relatively often, as if this was something that we believed in, as if this was something that we wanted to change. So I guess this is something that I want to challenge our schools, my own school, every educational institution, healthcare institutions. If we really want to make these changes, if we really want to see these things be different, then we have to alter the gatekeeper. Not saying get rid of any tests, not saying change things drastically, but if we are really wanting to address disparities by race, then we need faculty to look like the student body. We need faculty to look like the America that we have today. Because when you have people at the table that have a stake in a certain community because they're from that community, you get different results. The same way that you get different results if you have someone who doesn't represent that community making decisions for that community. And a little plug also for that question from that biology professor. He mentioned pipeline programs. I wanted to highlight the Student National Medical Association and National Medical Association. It's a program that I didn't take advantage of as much as I could have in medical school. They have at least 5, 6, or 7 different pipeline programs geared towards pre-med. And I also think even high school students, to get them involved with mentors and with different programs to get them fast-tracked to meet people and to also develop skills for test taking. So there are a lot of resources out there. And I think one thing that we do suffer with is we have a hard time disseminating information. It's out there to be taken. So I encourage, especially, I guess, Dr. Lofton, you're in the school system. And for all educators who are watching, there are a lot of programs out there for us to take hold of. The Student National Medical Association has, by far, I believe, the most of them, but there are a lot of great opportunities out there.
Dr. Lofton, earlier you alluded to the role of secondary, high schools, middle schools, elementary schools. Could you expand on that in terms of what do you see the role of educators in terms of inspiring and making those career paths available for our young people?
Yeah, I think it's no secret in order to become a medical doctor that you're going to take a ton of math and science courses, and that you need to have some level of proficiency in those courses. So again, from a K-12 perspective, I see our responsibility as exposing kids at a very early age to a rigorous curriculum that is centered around math and science, if they're interested in becoming a medical doctor. And again, I go back to my previous point that I think it's about representation, and it's also about role modeling that, and again, as educators, we have a responsibility to make sure that we're putting in front of our kids individuals that look like them and individuals that are not basketball players or other things, that it's important to put in front of our kids doctors, engineers, lawyers, so they can actually see that this is something that I might be able to do. So again, I think inspiration has to come from us, from a K-12 perspective. It has to come from us early. And we have to ensure that all of our students have access to that rigorous curriculum that they need, that guaranteed and viable curriculum, in order for students to achieve whatever they want to be in life. So again, I think the responsibility is on us, again, to expose those students at a very early age.
Thank you. Dr. Mathews and Dr. Holloway, once you were in medical school, did you feel there were intentional obstacles placed before you? They talked a little bit about that in the film, some of the barriers, some of the intentional barriers that you had to overcome. And if you had experienced this, what gave you the desire and motivation to continue on your path to become a doctor?
I'll start out by addressing that. I think for me, because I had a role model, my father was a family physician, I knew at least one person who had talked a lot about their medical school experience. and who had been successful. So it was probably easier for me than others. But the rest of the world, even once I got into medical school, would look at me and not really accept me as a medical student. I remember once I was involved in doing a special project with my medical school classmates, and we were walking in a line, and I was within a foot distance of the classmate in front of me, and the classmate behind me was within a foot of me. And as we were walking along, a professor said to me, "This is for medical students only." And I looked at him and I said, "Yes, I know." And I kept walking. So I don't know if you call those mini aggressors or microaggressors. I know we have different terminology, but I think it was more irritating comments like that that represented a barrier. That the people who were teaching me were excellent professors, and I got an excellent education. But I guess because perhaps I didn't look like the standard perception of what a medical student looked like, that initially I was not perceived as someone who was a medical student. And that happened more than once. So my response to that is, well, show people what you can do and prove them wrong. And that's always been my response. You worked hard to apply to medical school. You worked hard to get into medical school. You've got decent to good grades. That alone should stand on its own and be enough to show people that you are credible and that you will make a good physician. So to me, it's about letting people know what you're capable of, uplifting, showcasing your talents. If you've got colleagues and friends who are in the same boat, sharing experiences and supporting each other.
I don't feel that I had to face any intentional barriers. I guess I wouldn't say that, but I will say that there was always that extra layer that I felt didn't need to be there with interactions and with obstacles. For example, I felt like the teachers that I worked with were excellent. And there were just little things here and there that just reminded me, oh yeah, you're different than 95% of the people in the room. I remember I was in a small group with an advisor. We spent, let's say, a full year with this advisor, myself and 8 other students. We all would get to know each other, and it would be a group that we progressed with, became friends, good friends with. And I remember when I first met him, everyone was going around the room. We were introducing ourselves, where we were from. And when it got to be my turn, I let him know that, oh yeah, I'm from Detroit, Michigan, and just told him a little bit more about me. And then he stopped me when he said Detroit, and he said, oh, well, I'm so sorry to hear that. I'm glad you made it out. Something like that. And it probably was just a joke, but there's always just the subcontext, and it's like, well, what is that supposed to mean? Of course, you let that go and you move on. And then at different points, when you're taking exams or when you're talking to teachers one-on-one because you want a little bit more explanation, there's extra questions of, oh, are you sure that you don't understand? Are you sure about this? Or are you sure you can handle this? Or when you ask one question and then there's other things that come along with it. Then I wonder, do you ask everyone this? Or are you doubting me, and why are you doubting me? And then when it comes to, I made a note here. I wanted to make sure I didn't miss this. Yes, the ability to perform. In my class, there was close to 200 medical students, large school. And in my class, there was about 7 or 8 Black students. And unfortunately, some of them didn't do so well. And that's just because of the small sample size, not because they were bad students. There were plenty of other students of other races that didn't do well, and the school does a great job of retaining students, and everyone, for the most part, was able to make it through and do well. But I felt the pressure throughout my time there to say that I need to do well, because if I don't do well, there's such a small percentage of us. If I don't do well, then they're going to think that all Black students can't succeed. I have to show up, I have to show out, because I need to do this for all the Black students that ever will come behind me, if you get what I mean. And maybe some of that was placed on myself, but I do feel that that pressure was a little bit palpable, especially as you saw classmates have a little bit of issues here and there. And again, they did well and they continued on and there was no problems. But there were those stressors, there were those things that were always in the back of my mind. There were those moments when I would stop and think to process that extra step. Yes, I'm here. Are they bothered by my presence? Does me being here make someone uncomfortable? Do I need to speak a little bit less loudly? Do I need to not be as, do I need to not be aggressive? Do I need to not come off that way? Those are the kinds of things that were in the back of my mind. But overall, I had a wonderful med school experience that did not represent 90%. I mean, that was less than 5% of my experience, but it was there.
Thank you.
Dr. Holloway, I'm going to flip the script a little bit. First of all, I want to emphasize that overall, I had a great medical school experience, and I was very appreciative of the professors and the education I got. But sometimes, instead of expecting me perhaps not to know as much, there was the expectation that I would know more or almost be an expert depending on what the subject was. And I'll give you an example. I was in a histology class or a biology class, and we were studying blood cells and certain diseases. And in this particular class, we were studying sickle cell. Well, I was a first-year medical school student, and I didn't know a whole lot about sickle cell disease. But the professor kept turning to me saying, well, you should know. And she kept saying, well, you should know. And one time there was a question and she wanted people in the class to give her an example of a disease. And she looked at me and she said, well, you should know. And I said, oh, sickle cell? It was almost that, okay, you're Black, you ought to know everything there is to know about sickle cell. And my philosophy was, I didn't get really riled up about it. My philosophy was, okay, I'm a first-year student. I don't know a lot now. She obviously wants to teach me and show me. I'll absorb that information. I'll increase that to my knowledge base. And as I progress through medical school, by the end, maybe I will be a near expert. But I just thought it was almost hilarious, humorous, because there was the expectation that based on my skin color, I should have a lot more knowledge, almost an expert level of knowledge about that particular disease. And those are just things that happen. You endure those things. Again, it didn't really impact me in a great way or deter me or upset me, more of a minor inconvenience, I would say.
And I appreciate that response, because I do think I think it's so important to balance out what we're saying. What we're saying is in response to a particular question. If someone were to ask me, what was my overall med school experience? I wouldn't even think about those things. But since it was asked, I went and, thought about, oh, what were these experiences like? I do think it's always important for us, while there is systemic racism and while there is issues in our system that are baked in over time, not everything is that way. And we need to always be self-reflective, and we always need to be able to point the finger at ourselves as much as we point it elsewhere. Because life is so much more nuanced than that. So I appreciate that.
Thank you. A number of people in the Q&A section were talking about MCAT scores, and much of what we talked about the past 5-10 minutes reflected a number of comments in the chat. I want to shift the conversation just a little bit. We can look at what's going on right now with the pandemic, particularly as it pertains to vaccinations, and the number of Black people who have indicated that they do not trust the vaccination process. And I overheard a conversation in the barbershop the other day, and the number of gentlemen were saying, well, I'm not going to get the vaccination because of that Tuskegee experiment. And I started to say, do you even know what the Tuskegee experiment is? But we are in the barbershop, so I backed off. However, the distrust in the Black community in terms of seeing white doctors has been a long-standing aspect of our, and I say our, Black people's feelings when it comes to medicine. And there are a number of other things, whether it's the Tuskegee experiment that many people don't know about, but they referenced it, whether it's the mindset of you don't tell your business, and if you're sick, you don't go to the doctor, or I want to see somebody who looks like me. So the question I pose is, how important is it for a Black patient to see a medical person who looks like them?
I think as a student, as a medical student, just from my viewpoint, I'm not attending, so I don't have like total control over what happens with the patients. But as a student, we get to see a lot because we're quiet and we're observant. And a lot of times I see how patients are treated differently. And it's not that they're going to get the care from a non-Black physician. It's not that the care that they're going to get is going to be or substandard. There's rules, there's rules and laws that make sure that you follow a certain protocol and make sure that the patients get the appropriate treatment. But I think that, this happened this past week. There's this dismissal of feelings. There's a dismissal of concern that happens a lot of times, or there's a rush I see this extra rush when it comes to taking care of some Black patients, or there's a labeling of patients as non-compliant. And you see this a lot when people have a lack of proximity. So I think it kind of comes from like a lack of proximity, which leads to a lack of empathy, because you have people who come from different communities who fail to understand the concerns per se of Black patients. And with that, fail to understand their concern. Now you assume that when they vocalize their concern, or when they have certain facial expressions, you assume that, oh, this is like more of a personal attack or something that you can't really combat. I'm trying to see how I can best explain this without being too extra. I'll give an example. We have patients that come in who cannot afford their medications, who have to pay for bills or have to take care of child care expenses and things of that nature. So when it comes down to their health or paying those bills, they're always going to take care of the bills or survival. They're not going to take care of their health. But if you don't come from a community where you understand that people have to make that decision, you will always say that this person is non-compliant, and you won't per se look for ways to solve that issue. You won't see the issue that's in front of you. So when or you have the situation of, well, my assumption is that they can get to any pharmacy or they can get there. So now you send your medications to a pharmacy that's 15 minutes away, but that person doesn't have a car. But you never took that time out to say, hey, what's the closest pharmacy to you again? Or do you go to this pharmacy anymore? So now when this patient doesn't fill their script and they come back and their diabetes and their blood sugar is super high and their A1C is super high, you're like, well, you're not taking the medications I gave you. Well, that's not the case. It's not that they don't want to. It's because they have barriers that blocks them from doing that. And I feel as being an African-American male that comes from an environment where I've seen that and I've had family members who deal with these issues, I think of those things when I'm taking care of a person that maybe a person who's non-Black, who does not per se live around those people, who do not interact with those people on a daily basis, may not be able to recognize.
If I can add to that as well, I loved your example, teacher Dr. Madden. I think that encapsulates exactly what I want to shift to here. Obviously, we're not here to create a new form of segregation. There are doctors who see patients of all varieties, both sexes, and we are here to take care of the community at large. And especially in America, we are here to take care of our community. With that being said, it is important for the African-American community is special because we have in this country been systematically or systemically left behind for a long period of time. And so like you said, Mr. Gudgel, that we have these historical things that are in the back of our minds always. I think the most important thing is for us to just realize, or for us to see that we have a seat at the table. Every Black patient does not need to see a Black doctor per se, but it sure would be nice if there were more doctors. It would be nice if that was an option. It would be nice if there was more out there for the patient to decide, oh, I want to see this one or that one, and I can even decide to see one that looks like me, at least in some context. And I'll end with just this example that echoes Dr. Madden. I had a patient, and it was actually yesterday. She came in for an appointment a month early. She knew it was the 23rd. She just thought it was February 23rd and not March 23rd. She called in, and the front office staff person was also confused. They saw 23rd, they didn't look at the month. She came on in. When she got to the check-in window, she said, I'm here for my appointment. And then I heard the whole exchange. The front office person said, oh, it's not your time, your next month. And then the patient, they began to get really upset. African-American lady, she began to get really upset. She raised her voice and she left out angrily after they offered her, they said, you can stay and he'll try and squeeze you in. She came back in later in the day. We ended up squeezing her in. And then one of the nurses that roomed the patient, she said, you should probably talk to her. This is not how we do things here. This is, and, not in an aggressive or bad way. She was just basically saying, can you talk to her so that she doesn't keep doing this? So I went into the room, and because of my own experience and because of growing up around, growing up where I grew up, and I knew going in that I was going to be able to talk to this patient and be able to understand where she was coming from. At least I was going to try. And during the conversation, because we had that commonality, at least I believe so, we were able to get to a point where she said it herself. She said, I probably shouldn't have said that. I probably shouldn't have became so volatile. But when I came into the office, I felt uncomfortable. And then they started challenging me after I said I was here for my appointment. I felt belittled. I felt looked down on. And then I reacted that way in order to preserve myself. And, we talked about how it was very mature of her to be able to make that admission and how, in future, we're going to try and avoid these things from happening. But this patient, she brings her entire family to me. She came first and she said, oh my goodness, I have a Black doctor. I'm bringing everybody. And whenever they come, they bring more and more of their family members. And for them, it's something that's special to them. They know that they have an advocate. They know that they have someone that they see as on the inside, a family member that has their best interest at heart. So I think that there is something to it, and I think it is important.
I'm going to piggyback on that and ditto basically what my colleagues have said prior to me. But the key concept is trust and comfort. For the last 30 or 35 years, we've been using the term healthcare provider, medical provider. And I think that's such a misnomer because we don't provide health to a patient. They're in a position where they can make lifestyle changes and they can impact their own health. But we act as counselors, we give guidance, we facilitate, but in order to do that, the patient has to trust us, feel comfortable around us. And that's so important. And I'm speaking from my family medicine background. If you are to have the smallest hope of getting someone to do something preventatively, taking a screening test that might be uncomfortable, getting a shot, and so many people say, I just don't like shots, I'm not doing it. If you're going to have any hope of getting them to do something that might be uncomfortable, because you know in the long run that could prevent a chronic disease or a major infectious disease, there has to be that element of camaraderie, trust, and comfort. And having someone who looks like you may be what allows that. It's not an absolute necessity, but shouldn't a patient have a choice? If you've only got, depending on what article you look at and what stats you look at, if you've only got 3 to 5% of physicians in the country African American, it makes it difficult for people to have that freedom of choice. And so this is about having a discussion about what can we do to increase the odds? Because again, at the end of the day, we want people to live long but fruitful, safe, and healthy lives.
Thank you. So Dr. Lofton, you and I are in the world of education, elementary, middle school, and high school. And I don't know if you've noticed, but I've noticed it that females are increasingly rising in substantial numbers to the top in terms of grade point averages, academic recognition, and whatnot. And Josh, I want you to think about this question too. And this really gets to the gist of why we're here. Whose fault is it that there are so few Black men going into the field of medicine? And I'm going to add a second part for you to think about. So let's think more in depth why Black women are increasing in the medical field, but Black men are decreasing. So it's kind of an open-ended question with two parts to it, but give me your reflections and thoughts on just that whole aspect of the increase in Black females in the medical field. We're all for that, but the decrease of Black men, not only in the medical field, but just seems to what I see informally, academic achievements.
Yeah, that's a very good question, John, and it's a very tough question. And I would be remiss if I said, I had the answers to that. Again, I think it has something to do with in our community, specifically dealing with Black men. Many of our young boys idolize sports stars, and again, that's not a bad thing. But again, as I said at the outset, it's a both and here. Again, I think it's okay for our young men to do that, but at some point in time, we have to impart within them that you can do that, but you also have to be diligent about your studies. And as a public school educator, a lot of that responsibility falls on us. But at the same time, a lot of that responsibility also falls on families and the community. And what they see on the news, what they see in the media. Again, representation matters, role modeling matters. And when you turn on the evening news, or you turn on the television, if I don't see images of a Dr. Holloway or a doctor, soon to be Dr. Madden, you know, you can't be what you can't really see. So again, you know, as a public school educator, yes, we can make sure that kids have access to a guaranteed and viable curriculum. Yes, I definitely can make sure that we put in front of them representations that look like them. Yes, I can make sure that they are exposed to high quality math and science programs at an early age. All those things I can do as a public educator, and that's my responsibility, and we own that. But I do feel that the other parts of responsibility that we have to have more robust conversation about are home responsibilities and the responsibility of the community. And again, I think it all comes together in this notion of collective impact, right? So it's this triad. It's the schoolhouse, it's the community, and it's also the family. And if all those things are working in concert together, I think we can see that 2% dramatically rise for Black men in the medical profession, i.e. doctors. So again, I think the responsibility falls on all of us. I think we just have to be diligent about what that looks like for school districts and public education, and what that looks like in terms of what you do at home to encourage and support your young male in the math and sciences, and then what the community does, right? You know, it takes a village, what they do. So again, that triad, that whole notion of a collective impact, that whole notion of schoolhouse is working in collaboration with the home, is working in collaboration with the community.
I like to have an opinion on that. I think that one of the causes is that instant gratification plays a big role in this. I feel that for young men, especially coming up in certain environments, you know, you see the shoes, you see the clothes, you see the lifestyles, and when you don't have much, don't really have anything, you want to get to it as fast as you can. And a lot of times, that's not, you know, you're not going to wait 6, 7, 8 years to get that. Versus, and I feel like that's pushed a lot to a lot of young men, you know, to go get those things, you know. That's what's portrayed a lot on social media all the time. And that's what's portrayed on society. That is the narrative that's pushed towards us. Versus, I don't really see, growing up, I really didn't see many things like that for women. I didn't see like a lot of women, them pushing a lot about women going into athletics or women becoming these big time entertainers or anything like that. You saw a lot of women that went into education or went to start working, or even in my family, all the women that I knew in my family went on to either go to college or end up doing something big with their lives. While a lot of the men, it took a little bit longer, or they did not, go into that. They went into military right after or something like that. And so I think that's a big portion of like why a lot of Black men, you don't see us in medicine, is because even when we get to college, engineering degrees like that, like those get you get you $90,000, get you, financially well, versus if I go to medical school, well, now I have to do 4 more years of medical school. And then I have to do either 3 to 6 more years of residency. And at that same time, I may not have the money that I may want in order to get the things that I may want. And so I think that what we have to do is change the narrative. We have to change the narrative. We have to make it cool. Like, it's cool. Like, we have to show people like that you can get those things, or that materialistic things may not matter as much as they do right now. I think that's something that we have to do. We have to change that a lot and show that, becoming a doctor, you can get those things.
And John, additionally, I think that medical schools, and I think we touched upon this earlier, that again, K-12 has some responsibility in this. Higher ed definitely has some responsibility in this, right? And medical schools have some responsibility in this. I think Dr. Dale talked about it in the film, right? And I think he pitched this whole notion that if medical schools accepted, one more Black male into medical school, and I think he talked about 200. There were 200 medical schools across the country. That would mean, 200 more Black men who enter the medical profession. So again, I think it's a collective effort, but medical schools definitely have to begin to think about, and Dr. Dale talked about this, what's their purpose? What do they value? Is it rankings, or is it, providing individuals who are medical individuals to go back and serve traditionally underserved communities?
If I could add one comment as well. Today I listened to it was a webinar through the American Association of Medical Colleges, and they presented this statistic that Black males tend to score higher on the MCAT than Black females, but Black males are less likely to reapply if they're rejected once than Black females are. And I think there is something to be said about mentorship and support when dealing with difficulty, because I think that failure is often taken hard, and that's where we lose a lot of folk as well.
And I would agree, Dr. Holloway. I think oftentimes I see our young men, when they fail, have a very difficult time in picking themselves up and going at it again. On the basketball court, they absolutely do that. On the football field, they absolutely do that. You drop a pass, you forget about it after 2 seconds, and you go back and you run the next play. And I think that's what educators, and again, all of us have to teach our young men to do that when they're in the classrooms, right? If you don't do so well on a test, you figure out, okay, what can I do to do better the next time? And it's all about perseverance, and it's all about grit. And I think, we teach our young men to have grit and perseverance on athletic fields, but I'm not so sure that we're teaching them to have that same level of grit and perseverance as it relates to their academics and when they're in the classroom. And we have to do a better job at that.
How can we encourage personal responsibility without placing blame on the victim? And you've alluded to that, Dr. Lofton, but how can we encourage personal responsibility? Because all of you, as part of the panel, you all have your personal stories, your personal narratives. So how can we encourage our young people?
Again, I think Dr. Holloway mentioned it. I think mentorship is so critically important. I had a mentor. I still have a mentor. Actually, I have multiple mentors. And I think having individuals who would guide our young men from start to finish, from kindergarten all the way to graduate school. And that's an interesting notion, right? That if each one of us decided that we were going to mentor a young man as early as kindergarten, and we were going to try to see that young man through college and post undergraduate, what type of impact would we make and would we have on society? But I think mentorship is definitely something that, again, our young men may or may not have access to. And I think oftentimes they don't seek out mentors. So that's why I would propose that individuals like us and anyone else who would be interested, find a young man and mentor him. He may not know it in the sense that, what you're doing now, but I think as he gets older, that he's going to definitely understand that, wow, this actually had a huge impact on my trajectory in life. So I think it's about mentorship and sustainable mentorship, not just a single point in time, but continuous sustainable mentorship that starts very early on and lasts really for a lifetime.
I think it's important also, in addition to the mentorship, to understand the concept of transparency. So often people see the final outcome. You're wearing a white coat, you have the MD or the DO or the PhD behind your name, but maybe they don't have the true understanding of what you went through to get there. And not everybody enjoys a straight line of success. There are going to be some ups and downs, and that's normal. And that's okay to share that information with your mentee, because if they hear that and they realize that, hey, there are other people who had some failures and who had to pick themselves up and clearly, deliberately look at what can I do to improve the outcome the next time. If they understand that it's not just them going through this, but this is a common scenario, I think that, along with that longitudinal mentorship, including a level of honest transparency, I mean, I think that's a great combination to give people the sustained motivation that they need.
Thank you. There have been several questions in the chat in terms of what can we do locally in terms of inspiring our young Black males. Someone mentioned the Horizons in Medicine program at Wright State that's been going on for years. In fact, some of my students were attendees at the Horizon in Medicine program at Wright State. Earlier, Dr. Holloway, you talked about there are programs out there and we're sometimes lacking in communication. But what are some things locally that are going on that perhaps people aren't aware of, or perhaps that we can do just to help within the Dayton region increase the number of Black males in the field of medicine?
I would say partnerships again. It may not be clearly articulated right now, but I think if there was this collective will of the private sector, along with institutions of higher learning in the area, along with K-12 organizations, along with nonprofits, and the area medical schools, I think we could come up with something that is robust, and again, would have that collective impact that we would want to see, and would potentially increase the number of Black male doctors, not only across this region, but within this state and within this country. So again, I think exploring those partnerships and coming up with something that would have the collective impact that we would need to move some things forward.
I was going to say there's some things that we do currently at Wright State. Dr. Mathews actually came to one of our events that we hosted. Through our SNMA chapter, we actually go out to high schools. We have a Aspire mentorship program where we go to DECA, and we go and mentor youth once or twice each month. Right now, not because of COVID, but previously that's what we did. We went to Thurgood Marshall. Trying to think of the other high schools that we also went to. We do those. We also currently reach out to Central State, Wilberforce, and all the local schools that are part of like our SNMA MAPS chapters. So if people do have students or that are interested in medicine, or you want your students to meet other students that look like them that are in medicine, those are things that we're doing, and we're just looking for more and more people to partner with. Sometimes it's hard to get into the high schools because you have to create all these meetings in order to get in, and so sometimes we end up going to our Meadowdales and stuff like that. But we're actually doing those things currently at our institution.
Dr. Mathews, I'm going to take one of the questions you posed and share it with the panelists. You stated that preventive services are a key component of primary healthcare services, and ideally everyone should have a primary care physician. Do you think educating the public about the importance of prevention in general would increase the likelihood of prospective male Black doctors and male patients would connect? And it's a two-part question, but I'm going to stop there. I'll read it again. Preventive services are a key component of primary healthcare services, and ideally everyone should have a primary care physician. Do you think educating the public about the importance of prevention in general would increase the likelihood that prospective male Black doctors and male patients would connect?
I'll start by explaining why I asked that question. And I think being in the environment of COVID is a perfect opportunity to explore discrepancies with life expectancy. You may have heard that due to the deaths of COVID, the life expectancy overall, just based on statistics from the first half of last year, the life expectancy has dropped by about a year, but for African Americans, closer to 2.8 years, almost 3 years. And one of the things that we can do to maintain life expectancy or to increase it is to promote this idea of prevention. And I'll be honest with you, if I see a male, regardless of whatever race, that comes to the doctor's office or would come to see me, especially for the annual physical exam, I would try to do as much as I could because I knew the likelihood of getting someone to come back on a repetitive basis might be very slim. In general, comparing men to women, a lot of men just don't like coming to the doctor for prevention. If it ain't broke, why fix it? I'll come to you when I feel sick, as opposed I'll come to you to schedule my colonoscopy. So I think it's important to understand that. And again, it comes to this idea of trust. Who are you more likely to listen to get all of the preventive services that you need? Because that can be a difficult concept to drill home. The fact that you need a test when you have no signs or symptoms whatsoever of a disease, that can be difficult. But if we explain to people the importance of primary care and a primary care provider, I think we have the opportunity to change the trajectory of good healthcare versus suboptimal healthcare. Many people have never had the experience of having a regular doctor. So when they get sick, what they know is to go to an emergency room or to go to an urgent care. And going to an emergency room, number one, is one of the most expensive forms of healthcare. And number two, it doesn't facilitate that ongoing longitudinal relationship that is so important, because your primary care provider that knows you, maybe has taken care of 2 generations in your family, he or she may be more inclined to pick up on something. He or she is more likely to convince you that you need this preventive study, that you need preventive care. So what if we could understand what it takes to get people to understand this concept? And what if somehow we could try and marry that with, okay, you need prevention. The best way to do it is to have a primary caregiver. How about you, instead of going to an emergency room, instead of going to an urgent care, go to this one person that you have come to trust and that you continually trust over time, and who can help you manage your care. So that's why I threw that question in there. I know it's a little bit convoluted, but sometimes we have to look at the different elements of what makes longitudinal care good at driving prevention needs, because ultimately that, I think, is what's going to be a big contributor to life expectancy and reducing the discrepancy among the races.
I think that's a great point. And if I could just make a shameless plug right here for primary care, it'll be brief. My program director from residency she actually asked a question here in the chat. When I first started residency, she made a comment to me. She said, "You're a unicorn," and I asked her, "What does that mean?" And she was just saying it's just very rare for, in her experience, and I'm seeing it as well, for Blacks, especially Black males, to be found in primary care. We already are not in, have a low amount in medical education and as physicians in general, but most African Americans in medicine choose specialty care, at least I believe this is what it is. We choose specialty care over primary care. And I do think, based on especially what you just said there, if we are going to be addressing these health disparities, and if we're going to make change, not saying that we shouldn't go into specialty care, we definitely should. But I do think it would be something that we could start the conversation in another forum as well, to let people know about the opportunities in primary care, the impact that is being made. Because when I chose to do family medicine, I didn't initially plan on doing that when going to medical school. And when I made that decision, I had several people tell me, they said, "Oh, why are you doing this? You're so smart." And I said, "Oh, well, I mean, that's why I'm going into it. This is where we need the brightest and the best, in addition to every other specialty." So I think there is a lot of, I think our community, just like you said, Dr. Mathews, we overshadow the importance of primary care. We look past it. We don't see it as valuable, generally speaking. And I think it's something that we would do well to take a better look at. I don't know what the answer is, but I think it would be great if we could get more of us into primary care.
Yeah, I've had people say, "So you decided not to specialize, you didn't go into a specialty." And I said, "Yes, my specialty is family medicine. I specialize in you." And sometimes I describe what I do as holistic. And by that, I mean providing a template and providing counseling and guidance for health and wellness is not simply writing a prescription. It's not simply calling in a prescription. You really do have to understand the background. Does the individual live in a safe environment? Does the individual have health literacy? Do they have adequate transportation? There are a whole host of things that go into understanding how do I best meet the needs of an individual. So I'll get off my soapbox. Again, I don't mean to recruit family physicians or promote primary care, but in many ways, we are a gatekeeper and we are in a good position, I think, to help really promote and enhance preventive care. And that is a key, I think, to lowering the discrepancies that we see.
Dr. Holloway, please thank your colleague for their question. I noted that in the chat question area, they had mentioned that aspect about specialty care versus primary care. So thank you for sharing that out. Other things mentioned in the chat, someone mentioned role modeling. Another individual mentioned encouraging our young Black males to join math clubs, STEM clubs, science clubs, things along those lines. They talked about the importance of mentorship, sustainability, the role of the community. It takes a village, churches, community centers, and whatnot. So there's a lot of those areas that have been mentioned in the chat room that all of you as panelists have mentioned. I want to be respectful to time, and I know sometimes as educators, we sometimes gauge the attention span of people, and I think some of us are starting to suffer from probably a new medical diagnosis that I call Zoom fatigue. So I want to be very sensitive to that. So it's 8:30, we're scheduled to go till 9. However, I just wanted to go around to each of you just to give you the opportunity just to share some thoughts that you have in general, maybe pertaining to our discussion, pertaining to the film, or just in general. So perhaps we could just kind of go around as we perhaps wrap up in the next 10 or 15 minutes. So doesn't matter what order we go, but just maybe just some general thoughts or maybe some topics or areas that we did not cover.
I heard a couple references to, I was a geek, I was a bookworm, and I think we have to let youth know that that's okay. That's nothing to be embarrassed about. Again, we all have God-given talents and skill sets. Not everyone's going to be able to dunk a basketball or be a great tennis player or run very fast. I mean, it's a blessing you can find someone who's well-rounded, who's a great athlete, who's a good student, who's an all-around good person. That's wonderful. But I think people need to take pride and not be embarrassed that they enjoy school, that they enjoy math, that they enjoy science. We hear a lot about inductions into the Hall of Fame, there's sports days, but do we hear a lot about induction into the Hall of Brain Power, so to speak? So I just throw that out there because I think as role models and as educators, we're in a position to let youth know that that's okay.
I'll say a few words. 2 points here. One is I believe wholeheartedly that part of the change that we want to see is going to be due to grassroots movements, provider by provider, reaching out to their sphere of influence. And so I want to challenge local healthcare providers to take someone underneath their wing when they see patients in the office, ask about their career aspirations, offer them the ability to shadow, offer them the ability to mentor. We have to be engaged ourselves if we want to. It works from top down and not so much bottom up, I find. And then the other thing is, I really believe the big shift will be when we are able to help our young males and just all children really excel in reading and math, and just finding ways to help them to find confidence in those skills early on. Because I feel like in the first 3 to 4 grades of school, if a child's trajectory really depends on whether they are afraid of those things or if they feel like they can be in control of them. Because whatever you believe, it will be true. So whether it's parents seeing the importance and getting their kids enrolled in Kumon, or doing after school programs, just valuing this thing and knowing that if we want our children to succeed, it'll take an investment, and nothing comes about without really good investment. And yeah, that's all I gotta say. Role models and reading and math. We could work on those. We would do well.
Dr. Lofton or Dr. Madden, any?
Yep, I'll go.
Sure.
Again, I would just echo many of the sentiments already stated by Dr. Mathews and Dr. Holloway. And again, I would strongly encourage us to explore this whole notion of collective impact, and bringing all different aspects of society together to brainstorm around how we move this conundrum forward, how we actually increase the number of young Black men who are going into medicine. Being the only non-medical professional on the panel, I've learned a lot tonight, and actually learned a lot by watching the film. So again, the conversations that we've had have been robust, and the learning that I've had tonight and by watching the film, I'm definitely going to take those learnings and apply it to my everyday practice as a public school superintendent. So I appreciate you all and the expertise and the knowledge that you bring to your professions and to tonight's conversation. So thank you.
I don't know how many young people are on here or young males are on here, but I would say that one of the things that really helped me a lot was just paying attention to the people I hung around and understanding like how they impacted me a lot. So I would say just pay attention to that. If you really want to go far, just look at your friends and see how far they're going as well. And if they're motivated as much as you're motivated. And it's really about changing your mentality and changing the way that you view yourself. If you see yourself as a doctor, if you see yourself as an engineer, if you see yourself as a superintendent, all those different things, carry yourself that way. And that's what I would say.
Thank you.
I just want to,
Oh,
sorry.
go ahead.
I just want to piggyback on what Dr. Lofton said. Obviously, to be a physician, you have to go to medical school. And of course, before you get to medical school, you have to go to college. But I can just tell you from a heartfelt standpoint, I think probably the most important contributor to my being able to go on to college and then to medical school and do well in medical school were the early formative years. We hear K through 12, but I think in particular, the first half of that is so crucial, is so important. And I am so thankful and I feel blessed because the teachers that I had in those early years, they were just so encouraging. And nobody couldn't have told me that I wasn't in the best school district or the school system in the world. You know, I grew up in West Dayton and went to Dayton Public Schools, but in my mind, my teachers were great. I loved school. Was in a great school district because they were so passionate and so encouraging. And I think they used what they had at their disposal. I mean, since I've now work in an institution of higher education, I realize that there are components and the components aren't always equitable, but they use what they had and they exposed me and to others to special projects, to different cultures, even in those first 6 grades, those first 5 grades. So I think that is so paramount. Yes, we want medical schools to do a better job of recruiting and selecting, not simply based on an MCAT score, but there definitely is a role, and this is as a non-academic person, I think there definitely is a critical role in the K through 12 spectrum.
Dr. Mathews, I'm going to follow up your comment because there were 2 things that came up in the chat and one of them specifically pertained to you. The question reads, Dr. Mathews, do you believe that medical schools play a role in improving equity, and have you seen any tangible and measurable steps in this area?
Well, I'm going to use a real life example. I'm just going to use Wright State. Now, I'm not an expert on Wright State. I did not apply to Wright State because it was fairly new. But over the course of years and decades, based on what I've seen, they do a very good job of recruiting and selecting people who not only want to become doctors, but who want to make a change and serve their community. I was watching another panel discussion within the last several days, and there was a young woman, and her name escapes me, but she was a Wright State grad, a Boonshoft grad, and she was selected to the 40 under 40. And I knew I recognized her face. And I believe it was because she had visited Central State within the last several years and had spoken to some of our students. But when I read her bio and some of the phenomenal things that she was doing, I thought, this is exactly the type of person that we want to recruit to come to medical schools. This is the type of person who clearly understands the difference between equal and equitable. Because a lot of people don't understand that. They think, oh, everybody got the same amount or everybody got the same support. That's not what it's about. It's about giving people the adequate level of support so they can have the same chance, so they can stand at the same height. And so I think if we have schools that understand the importance of successfully bringing students through to completion, to graduate, and then to go back and serve their communities, then that school is doing a good job. So I know of one example, it appears to be that they're doing a great job, and that's here in the community. I went to a medical school, WashU, which was a very good medical school. I got a great education, but they were kind of known as the Harvard of the Midwest. And it was very, very unusual for someone graduating from Washington University to go into for primary care to become a family physician. I was probably considered a unicorn, but I had pretty much made up my mind because I had a role model and I had what I felt was a calling. And for the students that rotate through my clinic, I say, you get to choose the type of physician that you want to be. It's not about necessarily making a boatload of money. It's about creating an impact and making sure that everyone has decent access to good medical care.
There were a number of people who have saluted and acknowledged all of you. In fact, some of the comments were actual personal invitations for you to do some outreach to particular programs. As you said, Joshua, going to schools and whatnot, so thank you. At one time, we had 61 participants this evening. We had 27 Q&As. And I apologize to the participants if we did not cover your Q&A. I want to acknowledge the Greene County Public Library for putting this together. They have pledged not to make this a one and done event. They want to continue to be at the forefront with these discussions and action plans, and they are committed to next steps. So again, thank you to Carl Cologne from the Greene County Public Library. Thank you to all of you as panelists. And hopefully we'll continue the discussion and that there will be doable, sustainable, as you mentioned, Dr. Lofton, next steps. Everybody have a good evening and thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.